Great. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. And Michelle Pastor of the Nature Conservancy. Excuse the cough. I am getting over a cold, but it really sounds worse than it is. So if we take a step back and just think about why we value living in California, and probably many reasons for it, among them are natural resources. From our coastal redwood forests and our wetlands to the forests in the Sierra, where we get much of our water, from our rangelands and agricultural lands to parks and our urban forests. They really are part of the engine for our well-being. And their condition, the health of these resources, are really key to our overall human health, our water quality, habitat for fish and wildlife, for jobs, and for our climate. And I'll focus more on this climate nexus with our natural resources as part of this discussion and highlight the case study report that we just published with the support of a lot of contributors and colleagues in this. The report and the case studies in it are really meant to be illustrative to help answer a lot of the key questions that have come up, like what is carbon sequestration, how can resources actually contribute and be a part of the climate change solution, and what does this really look like on the ground? A lot of times it's, we're talking the abstract, and it's really hard to understand what it means for us in our personal lives. They are illustrative, and certainly there are more case studies and actions that we can undertake to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'll start by providing an overview of just what is carbon sequestration, and we'll get into the case studies so we can make this a little bit more tangible for everybody. And then we'll end by giving you just a few recommendations on what we can do, what the state can do actually to help advance these kinds of activities. So here are the basics for carbon sequestration and the carbon cycle. As trees and other vegetation grow, they absorb carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So they pull it out of the atmosphere and they store it in the leaves and the branches, the trunks, roots, and some of this also goes then into our soil. Some of this naturally goes back to the atmosphere through a process called respiration. But on balance, these systems are naturally what we call a carbon sink, that if managed and conserved, they can actually store greater amounts of carbon as they grow than what's released back into the atmosphere. So it's a system. And it's pretty unique, as it is one of our only sectors, or it is our only sector, that actually pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. If these systems are disturbed through human actions, like forest to farmland conversion, poor land management, or even fire, then much of the carbon that's stored in these systems can be released back into the atmosphere. So really the trick is to maintain the carbon and to manage and conserve these systems well, so that we actually can keep the balance in a way that we're actually storing more carbon and absorbing more carbon than what's being released. And then our natural resources can actually work for us in being healthy net sinks of carbon dioxide. Here's a less scientific analogy to think about our natural systems, and that's to think of them as our natural state carbon bank, that we really want to hold on to the principal, or in the case of my bank account, we want to restore the principal, but that's our carbon bank, and we have vast stores of carbon in our systems right now, and there's opportunity actually to build that and to gain interest. And this interest comes not only in the form of more carbon sequestered, but in all the other benefits I mentioned around our air and water quality, resilience to climate change, our economy, and just our overall quality of life. So let's take a look at what these activities actually look like on the ground, and these are featured in the case study report, and many of you may have copies of that already. But this is a working ranch, the Dollies, who are located up in Tehama County. And if you look to the right here, this is a forest project, oak woodland conservation project. And I know the map is small, but really what's highlighted in green is really the expanse of our forest land, just to give you a sense of scale of how much we really have. The Dollies had decided to put a conservation easement on their property. They're continuing to ranch the land, but they've made the decision to protect the native oak woodlands on their property, which is over half of their property. And by doing so, they are protecting the principle. They're protecting over 500,000 tons of carbon dioxide that is stored in that forest, in their ranch land. And as the forest does continue to grow, it's actually going to store roughly another 130,000 tons of carbon dioxide by sequestering that. So beyond the climate benefits, there are multiple other benefits. As I mentioned, they can continue ranching on their land, but they're also protecting native habitat that's really important for other wildlife. And when you look at trying to build resilience in a warming climate, these intact landscapes become more important to allow some of these species to migrate to different areas so they can find more suitable habitat as certain places become unsuitable in a warming climate. Moving our trees over to a more urban-focused area, we highlighted the Sacramento Shade Tree Program. It's an urban forestry program here in Sacramento. It is a partnership between the Sacramento Municipal Utility District and the Sacramento Tree Foundation. It is a tree planting program that is meant to serve the utilities district area. And since 1990, about over 500,000 trees have been planted on 175,000 properties. So from a climate perspective, this initiative, and they've extended this effort to include public spaces, it has led to the removal and storage of carbon dioxide of about 930,000 tons of carbon dioxide. And these trees do continue to grow and store more carbon. And then it's also leading to many other benefits in terms of energy efficiency and providing shade, so there's less electricity demand. It helps with urban heat island effect, again, another area where there's a synergy between both reducing greenhouse gas emissions and building resilience for people and for nature. And then it also just creates an overall better quality of life and aesthetics. Our wetlands also do have a great potential to absorb more carbon. This is a project that's taken place in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, which is 750,000 acres. It's a pretty large area. But if you look at the map, it's a little hard to see on the projector, but we do have wetlands, inland wetlands and coastal wetlands as well. And we focused on the Delta, given focused research that has actually taken place on Twitchell Island with the Department of Water Resources and University of California and the U.S. Geological Survey. Starting in the 90s, they decided to take an area of land that's been deeply subsided on Twitchell Island. And in fact, there's quite a bit of land that is subsided in the Delta, as many of you may know, so they're below sea level. And they started to restore it with native grasses called tule and cattail. And the result of that is, over the years, they're seeing the buildup of soil over time and more carbon being sequestered. And so there's a dual benefit. Well, there's multiple benefits that are happening, but from a climate perspective, that land is no longer, that area is, it's reducing this subsidence or sinking of that land, which is actually helping, if you do it on a larger scale, it helps with the levees and minimize levee failure risk. And it's also reducing the emissions that result from that subsidence, because as you continue to farm, in many instances what's happened is it exposes the soil and all that carbon in the soil to sunlight, and a lot of that carbon gets emitted. So by replanting the tule and the cattail there, you're reducing that, and in addition to that, you're actually storing more carbon. As the soil starts to build up, it stores more carbon over time. So it shows terrific potential. They're finding that the aggregate benefit in terms of a climate greenhouse gas reductions is roughly 7 to 14 tons on a per acre basis. This is something that can be replicated around the Delta. They're certainly looking at other practices like switching from corn to rice as another beneficial practice for reducing emissions. And in addition, the other benefits, besides the reducing the subsidence and risk of levee failure, which is, helps reduce risk to public safety, it helps buffer against sea level rise. We're talking about resilience again, does help protect millions of farming jobs. So when you reduce the levee failure in particular, then you're actually protecting other farming properties that would be at risk due to levee failure. So there are a number of benefits that occur alongside of the actual greenhouse gas reductions. In Sonoma County, the Nature Conservancy, we are partnering with the Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District on a landscape scale project to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through land use change, changes in management and conservation, and it includes rangelands. In Sonoma, between 1984 and 2006, approximately 24,000 acres of rangeland was converted to agriculture and urban uses. And just again on the map there, you can see where Sonoma County is, but you can also see the extent of our rangeland across the state, which is pretty significant. It's over 30 million acres combined with farmland. Our preliminary analysis suggests that avoiding the conversion of rangeland in Sonoma County can avoid as much as 35 to 40 tons of carbon dioxide per acre. So it's our hope through this project that we can actually link it to incentives. So looking at a large landscape scale and looking at land use and land use plans and programs where you can actually try to shift that balance or actually protecting more of those rangelands and avoiding those emissions. And so the other benefits that are associated with conservation of rangelands, include water quality, protecting habitat for pollinators like bees are really important for crops, habitat for wildlife, and then being able to maintain family ranching and farming areas. This is our last case study that'll show, but I want to be able to also highlight an agricultural project as well. This is Fetzer Vineyards, where they're actually undertaking integrated management. They decided a number of years ago to transition their vineyard operations to organic wine production in Mendocino County. Again, that map highlighted in yellow shows the extent of agricultural land beyond just Fetzer and where they are. Their efforts are about half of their property. They are protecting the forest, and the other area which is cultivated are their vineyards. But in between their vineyards, they're actually doing cover crops too. So the combination of protecting the forests and doing their cover crops is allowing them to maintain roughly 129 to 187 tons of carbon dioxide per acre, and the cover cropping is actually leading to incremental gains of stored carbon in the soil over time as well. And they're doing a lot more beyond that in terms of renewable energy and water conservation. But the benefits for them is that their organic label is one of the leading organic wines in the U.S. And their operations are actually, they've decreased their operational costs by taking on some of these efforts. They're protecting habitat for wildlife, and they're also protecting air quality through their cover cropping by protecting from dust. So just a few suggestions in terms of what we can do to try to leverage more of these activities across the state. Certainly including our natural resources as part of our climate strategies is really key, and incorporating that as part of our policies. We do need to develop a system, more coordinated system, a standardized way of being able to account for emissions and reductions over time, and also to be able to quantify, look at metrics for resilience in terms of how are we making these systems resilient to climate change, and also by extension, communities. We should look to, and Stuart touched upon this, integrate our natural resources with land use strategies to reduce emissions, like sustainable communities, sustainable community strategies. And ultimately, we do need to make sure that there is meaningful funding for the resources, so we can actually protect the principle and build the interest. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for being your own technicians.
Yeah.
Welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Strella Servus with the California Environmental Justice Alliance. Very happy to be here, and we really appreciate the invitation. And so today, I'll be focusing on equitable climate policy. There's been a lot of conversation around data and, kind of high-level types of things around climate and impacts. But I'm going to give the perspective, the community perspective, and I'll be talking about, in particular, how climate policy is impacting or can potentially impact people on the ground. And I'll be talking about a climate gap and what it means in terms of a climate gap, and then offer some possible solutions as well. So just a little bit about the California Environmental Justice Alliance. So we're a statewide grassroots and environmental justice alliance, and we're made up of 6-member organizations. A couple of them are here, so I just have to give a shout out. So representatives from the Asian Pacific Environmental Network that are based in the Bay Area. Representatives from the Center on Race, Power, and the Environment are also here, and then also some other STEHA staff. We also work, CCAEJ is an organization that works out of Riverside and San Bernardino, Communities for a Better Environment. I'm actually based in LA and in the Communities for a Better Environment office, and they're also based in Oakland. Environmental Health Coalition covers the San Diego area, and then Bodair is based in the San Francisco Mission District in particular. And so what we do is we look at all of the gaps in terms of policy, in terms of environmental justice policy, and bring the community voice up to the statewide level so that we can talk about what the community needs are and push for environmental justice policy. And together, all of these organizations make up around 15,000 low-income communities and communities of color. So a little bit about me and who I am. So I grew up in a neighborhood in LA. So this is a map of LA. The red are the most polluted areas. I grew up around the El Monte, Baldwin Park area, and I grew up with asthma, and so did a couple of my siblings. Little did I know after growing up that after looking at all the data that I actually lived in one of the most polluted neighborhoods and made the connection between living in a community that was mostly community of color, low income, and the connection to my own health. So, this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. And so just a little bit about, the background and a kind of a high level of the changing demographics. So this is a slide of 1980 and the percent of people by color by county. This is just to give a sense nationally of how the demographics are changing. So again, 1980, and then the orange and the red are 40% and 50% over people of color. That's 1980. And then we fast forward to 2040, and you'll see the massive shift in terms of demographic, in terms of people of color, and how things are changing. And so we'll see California really be the majority people of color here. So we're presented with a really big opportunity because now California can potentially be poised to not only lead in curbing climate change, but also, the polls show that people of color are actually the ones that care most about the environment and climate, and more so than even then the white population. And so California really has an opportunity to lead in terms of equitable climate policies to address these people of color and communities. And it's really now is the time to really reach out to these communities and to begin to organize them while this demographic change is happening. And we see it as two possible futures for ourselves. So there's, we can do nothing and leave it as status quo, and then we would be hit with a massive climate apocalypse. Or we could look at, the changing demographic, the people of color, the people that are most hit by climate change, and look to a future of climate justice. And so right now, I think we really have a huge opportunity to achieve some win-win solutions for us. We feel like the most effective greenhouse gas emission reduction policies should focus on improving air quality in the state's most toxic hotspots across the state. And to move forward, we should set overall goals to address climate change. And without focusing on the communities that are most overburdened, we think that that could be bad policy and it misses a really critical opportunity for us. So we must view addressing climate change as an opportunity and a vehicle for improving air quality in the state while bringing renewable energy and other benefits directly into communities that are most impacted. And for all the talk about benefiting disadvantaged communities in policy, we really have yet to see both the coupling of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and at the same time improving air quality in the most disadvantaged communities. And so these are a couple of slides that show that our communities are already suffer from the epidemic rates of asthma and respiratory issues related to poor air quality. This is a slide that is from the Cali PA's CalEnviro Screen 2.0. So Latinos have a 1 in 3 chance of living in a census tract that is highly impacted by pollution, versus you'll see in the blue there white communities who have a 1 in 14 chance of living next to in a highly impacted community. So throughout the state, people of color face really a 50% higher risk of cancer from ambient concentrations of air pollution that are listed under the Clean Air Act than whites. And we have statistics like more than 1 in 4 African American school children in urban LA have problems with asthma, and hospitalization rates are actually 3 times higher for African Americans than the average. In the Valley, 1 in 5 children in the Valley suffer from asthma. So we're beginning to see what the climate gap actually looks like here. And this is a report. These slides were taken from a report that was done by some researchers, Manuel Pastor from USC, Rachel Morello-Frosch from UC Berkeley, and Jim Sad from Occidental College. It's called Minding the Climate Gap, and I have a copy here. It's a great report, but this slide shows that our communities will be hit first and worst foremost by climate change and already suffering from our greenhouse gas emitters. And people of color are more likely to be living nearest the greenhouse gas emitting facilities with high emissions of co-pollutants such as particulate matter. This slide shows that overall people of color experience over 70% more particulate matter emissions that live within the 2.5 miles of major greenhouse gas emitters than white communities. And then another slide, also from the climate gap. This graph shows that the lower your income, the more likely you are to live within 2.5 miles of a major greenhouse gas emitter. Nearly half of all Californians live within 6 miles of a facility that is a significant greenhouse gas emitter. But they are disproportionately people of color, and in fact, 62% of nearby residents are people of color as compared to 38% who are non-Hispanic white. And in Ceja, we talk about the communities of color and environmental justice communities really experiencing what we call the green divide. And so the green divide is something that where environmental justice communities are often kind of promised that they'll be that their unemployment issues and jobs issues and health issues will be addressed through energy policy, through the green economy. What we're seeing is that a lot of our communities don't necessarily get the direct benefits of renewable energy policies. A lot of it is because we see a lot of solar farms out in the desert that aren't directly built in low-income communities and in communities of color. So what we would really love to see is to close this green divide and actually get local distributed generation into low-income communities and communities of color. is an example that the clean economy was supposed to add 500,000 green jobs between 2003 and 2010. So in the state, California actually increased in terms of green jobs by 500,000. But our communities on the ground really don't see those impacts. So we'd really like to see both the health benefits and the green jobs benefits from the green economy. And so CEJA is offering a few action steps, so 3 action steps. The good news is that we can achieve win-win goals, both reducing greenhouse gas emissions on site and improving air quality. And these are 3 main ways that our communities can receive benefits from climate policies that the Assembly can actually take advantage of. So number 1 is ensuring direct air quality benefits for our communities through greenhouse gas reduction targets and measures. We would love to see reductions on site of greenhouse gases and ensure that a percent of compliance with AB 32 actually happens on site. We'd also like to see a rapid decrease in the number of free allowances available within the current climate regulatory system and a decrease of trading. Action step number 2 is ensuring that there are aggressive renewable energy goals that get local renewable energy directly into the most impacted communities. So what CEJA has been pushing for are policies that have really hard percentages or carve-outs of renewable energy that directly get put in disadvantaged communities. This can be via the renewable portfolio standard increase, so we support the increase of the renewable portfolio standard to 50%. We'd also like to see that there are some robust measures and percentages and carve-outs for disadvantaged communities, in particular in that example. And then we'd also like to see labor standards to increase the quality of jobs in distributed generation implementation. So things that we have advocated for to put in policy are, for example, strong local hire language with pathways to green careers. So we don't want to just end up with dead-end jobs, temporary low-wage jobs. We really want to see our communities get the best kinds of jobs. A local example in LA, where I am from, there was a study that was done that shows that 1.7 million people in LA live in multifamily buildings, and 94% are actually renters, and that's a lot of our communities. So there's a huge opportunity to build in low-income multifamily buildings, and in fact, there's a program right now a pilot program where 300 megawatts of the program is supposed to get located on multifamily, and this can potentially create 4,500 job years over the length of the program. Action step number 3, investments in disadvantaged communities. I know that we're not supposed to talk about what we want in the budget. I prepared my slides before you made that comment.
No, that was everybody else.
Okay, great. But we would like to make sure that the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is being used for climate solutions that provide direct benefits for disadvantaged communities. We are really concerned with the recent announcement, the governor's allocation of the that all of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, $250 million, is supposed to get spent on high-speed rail, and that's supposed to then cover disadvantaged communities. And so this is a concern for us because it can be very ambiguous whether or not that all of that money going towards high-speed rail will really benefit disadvantaged communities. If you have rail cutting through a lot of the communities that we work in, but that they don't really get to directly benefit from that. And so we want to ensure that what counts as benefits is really meeting the needs of disadvantaged communities. So we support some of the details of the allocations that the 535 Quad has been pushing. So the 535 Quad is the great coalition that has been advocating for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, specifically in disadvantaged communities. For example, we support the $70 million for heavy-duty vehicle and equipment projects. So this will make significant investments in electrifying heavy-duty vehicles and freight. We also, I was talking about renewable energy earlier, support $55 million allocation for low-income energy programs. So this is really strong weatherization in solar and renewable energy programs in disadvantaged communities. We also support the $26 million allocation for the Charge Ahead program. So we really need to invest in ensuring that low-income residents have access to electric vehicles by investing in the Charge Ahead equity program. And then a lot of our communities take public transit, so we really need to make significant investments in public transit, including things like bus passes for low-income riders. This is my last slide. And so this is a picture of my daughter. She's 10 now. She's the one holding the solar panel. And so it's really, you know, what motivates me to come here. I flew up here from LA, come to Sacramento quite a bit to advocate on energy and climate policy, but for low-income communities and communities of color. And so at 10 years old, she wants to be president, and she says she already has a platform for herself. And her platform is, you know, her vision is that if she were to be president, she would bring in more electric vehicles into low-income communities and communities of color. And her plan, her vision is to take all of our trash and then convert that so that we could, rather than use fossil fuel, use the burning of our trash. I don't know how that would fly with the greenhouse gas reductions goals, but that's her big vision. So we have a huge opportunity right now. The slide that earlier where I was talking about the future, which pathway, we could go down the pathway of doing nothing in the status quo or really looking at the disadvantaged communities across the state. And I'll just leave you with the question of which future we will choose. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If only your daughter could run the upcoming election, I'm sure she would have garnered a few votes here today.